Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
So we're on Thursday morning. You have to forgive me, Matt. I am putting on a carnival here in Northampton, Massachusetts. I'm part of an organization that's formed recently to promote public school enrollment.
Yes.
When you live in a state with a school choice, this is a school choice state, Massachusetts. Your school competes with other schools. They compete with private schools. They compete with charter schools. And there's lots of political opinions about whether that's good or bad. But
it's making you put on a carnival. That's like evidence that it's awesome.
This is certainly. I don't know if every school district feels this way, but I feel the competitive pressure to say we have to sell the public schools if we're going to maintain or increase our enrollment. And when public schools, the way it is in Massachusetts, if you lose a student to a charter school, the taxpayer money goes with the student, and your budget is eroded. So
is this a Romney thing? When did this is interesting that because that sounds like a great idea, and I'm surprised in liberal Massachusetts you would have it.
Well, I would argue it's a horrible idea, but there's certainly, and I don't know off the top of my head if it was Romney that did it or a predecessor, but there's definitely a faction of Democrats who like school choice, who like charter schools.
Well, Cory Booker was a big Democrat for school choice in New Jersey
until a few months ago. And I just speaking here, so I live in a very liberal part of the state, and there are plenty of liberal people in my area who send their kids to charter schools. But I know that a lot of them voted against lifting the cap on charter schools. There's a cap of how many the state can have, sort of keep it in kind of semi-experimental mode and not completely steamroll the public schools. And that there's a ballot initiative in 2016 to lift that cap, and the pro-charter forces heavily outspent the pro-public school forces. I mean, just on money, it was, like 100-1. It was ridiculous. And yet it lost, considerably.
Yeah.
And I know anecdotally from around here, a lot of liberal Democrats said, yes, I sent my kid to a charter school, but I'm uncomfortable with this funding mechanism. I don't like the fact that it undercuts the budgets of public schools, and I don't want to see this get worse statewide, and voted against lifting the cap.
Here's the big issue. If I fly to Northampton, Massachusetts, could I dunk you in a dunk tank? Like if I throw a baseball just right, will you be in a dunk tank?
There is a dunk tank. I will not be in the dunk tank. But we have two people who are almost basically sure to be new state legislatures. We've had our area had long-time legislators who one died, one got forced out in a scandal, so that we abruptly lost a lot of seniority in a very short period of time, and so the races were heavily contested for the primary, but for the Democratic primary, but there's no Republican opponent, so they're essentially sure things in the general, and so we'll have both of them in the dunk tank, as well as a school superintendent and a school principal and I believe some of the teachers, but not me. So anyway,
you'll be in the kissing booth. I know.
This is all to say that I've been very focused on putting on the carnival, and I may not be as sharp as far as the details of the news this week, but I'll do my best.
I love how you are, again, it's just proving my point about the atheist who's a better Christian, the liberal who's in family values, happily married, involved in his local community. I wouldn't be surprised if you're not part of the Elks Club and the Kiwanis Club. And this is, I think, great values. And I think I'm going to applaud.
There is an Elks Club and Kiwanis Club in this area. I am not a member, but those places do exist in Northampton.
And I applaud this school choice movement for generating this kind of community involvement, getting you to put on this carnival. So I admire as I will not.
Well, the thing I want to say about this, one last thing,
Yeah.
and this is the premise of the organization. My sense is that charter schools and private schools they have marketing teams, they have ad campaigns, they sponsor events, as well as having a population that is prone to evangelize. You chose this school, you bought into a concept, and you want to share that concept with your friends and neighbors. And a public school, by and large, is a default option. You don't sign up for it. You don't get picked in a lottery. You're not paying a tuition for it unless you choose in. And some people do choose in. And there's no marketing. There's no PR person that the school gets to hire. There's no ad budget. So if you don't do something proactively to say these are the good things about the school, I mean, people's gut approach is to sell the public schools politically. You should be in a public school.
Right.
It's good to support your public schools.
They sell it from the macro level. It's good for society, but
yes.
At the micro level, it's it's a sacrifice.
And we actually have the survey data to show that the people that opt out are the more upscale families who are basically saying this is what's best for my kid. They're making a micro decision, and so this is a way to give micro information. These are the selling points for the school. So we got facts and figures on the Carnival ticket packs that are not well known, as well as showing the community itself is a selling point. People want to know, what's the community like? What am I going to be entering into as a family for the next 12 years of my kid's
what
life?
This reminds me of? This will sound a little ridiculous, but I'm reading Francis Fukuyama's excellent book right now. He's going to come on the podcast, and it's about identity. And he talks about how, like in liberal democracies, where there's a lot of like pluralism, it's actually in a way harder to have an identity, whereas the nationalism is all about identity, right? We speak German, we believe in Allah, whatever it is, whatever your version of tribalism is. When you are a diverse place, it's hard to. How do you get people to rally? I mean, where I went to a public high school, and we hated Walkersville, Maryland, and we were the Knights, and that was sort of the tribalism. It was like those effers in Walkersville,
right,
Shelbyville,
right.
But I don't know how sticky that is. Like why it was just arbitrarily we hated Walkersville, and
they were the neighboring school, and you played them in sports, and so you built up animosities.
And we were the Knights, and that was pretty arbitrary, and yet it kind of worked. I still don't really like Walkersville that much even now, but I think that it's easier, like if you go to a private school where you are like self-segregating. It could be a Catholic school or a religious school or whatever, but it's probably easier to have an identity than it is if you're at a public school.
Easier to have an identity.
That's a challenge for you.
Yeah, well, I think people definitely have stronger identities to their privates and charters than they do to their publics. Although, but one thing we want to cultivate is like, look, if you want to have a tight-knit community, if you want to have a walkable, bikeable school, 2/3 of our students walk and bike to school. Charters, you got to get on a bus or have a long commute, or same for privates, and so why that's often considered, charters are often sold as something that's going to be good for people of all economic levels.
Right.
The reality is not everybody has the ability to drive their kid 25 minutes to a school because they have to get to work themselves.
Right.
And actually, I don't know if there actually is bus service for those places. So having something that's nearby is actually a real benefit. And
totally.
And an affluent family might want to think about that. Maybe I can.
Let me throw this idea at you, man. I'm thinking about making a documentary about this, actually. I'm a little pissed off. I live near, and I used to live really near, a school called George Washington Middle. Jim Morrison. This was Jim Morrison's high school.
Huh.
It's
because his dad was high up in the Navy.
Yeah. It's in Alexandria, Virginia. It's called. I want to change the name, and I'm thinking about doing a documentary on this. Actually, I want it to be called Jim Morrison Middle, or Morrison Middle. Also, one of the mamas and papas, maybe Mama. I don't think it was Mama Cass, but one of the mamas and papas went there. Now, here's my thing. I'm not saying Jim Morrison was an exemplary student. I don't even think he liked Alexandria, Virginia.
I'm guessing not.
And I love George Washington. Let's just lay the cards on the table. But there are a lot of things named after George Washington. I think there should be a Morrison Middle. I think there should be, that's an attraction. How could you have a middle school and not sell it? There's nothing. There's not a plaque. There's not a statue. Jim Morrison Middle.
You are the worst conservative in America.
This is marketing, my friend.
You are trying to tear down the fabric of our nation.
I'm a capitalist.
The building blocks of society by celebrating those that want to destroy all that's good about the American family.
Billy, baby, I don't even like the Doors. This is about capitalism, man. Anyway,
so
this is my call. This is one of the causes that I'm championing right now in my local community.
Now, I think you're procrastinating. You're stalling.
Well, let me just give the segue.
You don't want to talk about Brett Kavanaugh.
Well, what I was going to say is your marketing plan should involve the fact that this is not Georgetown Prep. Maybe that should be a T-shirt. We are not, because look, no, I'll just say, I don't know if Brett Kavanaugh is innocent or guilty of this thing that he's been accused of, but I think there is a deserved stereotype about these kind of rich kids who go to places like Georgetown Prep and the way that they're entitled behavior, and I think that narrative is sort of underneath some. It's a subplot in this story.
Well, it's only I mean, you can see from the response from the alumni of the area schools, that it strikes a huge nerve. That plenty of people had similar experiences, and people in that echelon of society have ready access to media platforms. They can organize these petitions or these joint letters relatively quickly, and they'll get attention from media outlets, because a lot of people in these media outlets went to these schools, so they know who to contact and make sure that this gets attention. I mean, I'm sure there's some things that occur at places that were not elite prep schools as well. But sure. You're going to have.
It's just interesting. I wrote a piece at the Daily Beast that came out Friday, the day that this story really kind of dropped. I mean, I think there were hints of it, but I wrote a piece that came out Friday, which I'd been writing for days. And at the time, it was a controversial piece because I was daring to say that I thought Brett Kavanaugh did not perform very well in the hearing. And I assumed that this would be contrarian and controversial because he was a slam dunk to be confirmed. And there was just something about him that I just don't like. There's this smirk that he has, his demeanor, and I compared him to Gorsuch. I thought Neil Gorsuch's confirmation hearing, if you go back and watch it and juxtapose it, Gorsuch seemed just much more likable, much smoother. And so I wrote a piece about how, basically the premise was Kavanaugh is going to be confirmed, but let's not pretend that he did a great job, right? And there was something about him that just didn't quite resonate. And then this story lands, and again, I don't know if he did this or not, but when I check my own biases, and let's keep in mind, as a dude, I am perhaps biased. And as a conservative dude, you could certainly say I'm biased to sort of maybe give Kavanaugh the benefit of the doubt. As a guy, the son of a prison guard who went to a public school, and watched a ton of 80s movies with guys who looked like Brett Kavanaugh, who were like Johnny Lawrence from Cobra Kai, I'm predisposed to hate people like Brett Kavanaugh and to see them as the villain. And I do think there's something about the Georgetown Prep rich, entitled kid that makes you think, maybe they are the type of people who would take certain liberties like that.
So as a conservative, and I'm not just asking about you, but also what conservatives in Washington are saying right now, that you're always my opportunity to get the pulse.
Well, if I'm the way that you get, I mean, 10 years ago, we've been doing this show for pert near 10 years now, there was a time, I think, when this was helpful for you to get a sense of the conservatism. I'm not sure I really serve that function.
Well, you used to be in the Daily Caller office, so you were with these guys all the time, and now you're at the Daily Beast, and you're not in a conservative newsroom anymore.
But I would say really it was when we started this, when I was like, working at townhall.com or something, that I was probably, better.
And you're hitting the scene, you're out and about in Washington society. Anyway, so we know already, and we've talked about this on the show before, conservatives will tolerate a lot to get a Supreme Court judge. Say, elect someone who is decidedly unconservative in many ways and is destroying the fabric of American society. If I want to get judges from that, we'll take it. Sorry. I said something to trip Alexa off. I don't know what I said, but Alexa.
Is this Amazon Echo?
My Amazon Echo is now yapping in my ear, and I don't know what I said to do it. So on one hand, we could say conservatives, whatever this guy did, who cares? We just got to get this guy in, and he's going to vote our way, and that's all that matters.
Okay. Some people, I'm sure there is a segment of the right that would say that.
There's some people, and you've articulated this, and I think Ross Douthat has said this on Twitter in some sort of glib way, and I think his most recent comment, I think, sort of speaks to this. You guys wanted Amy Barrett the whole time. You never were 100% sold on Kavanaugh, and I don't think you would put it this way, but I think it's because she is on record being very skeptical of precedent. She has written about that in legal journals, that we should not be as deferential to precedent as some others would say, and Kavanaugh has not been as explicit about that, although there are things in his emails that suggest he might think similarly. Someone say this is a chance. Look, we don't need, there are other conservatives in the world. We don't need Kavanaugh. Yank this guy now.
Yeah.
Get Amy Barrett in there as soon as you can, and let's go. We don't need this cloud over our heads. But then is there an extra level? Are people in that camp? These are people who really want a very loud and proud conservative on the court. Is there another aspect that kicks in that says, okay, we can't have a society that says what you did in high school is going to disqualify you for something as an adult 40 years later. If we let that be the standard, it's just going to be open seas on everybody, and that's not a tenable situation. So does that override all in this debate amongst conservatives?
Well, no, I think what overrides all is, did he do it?
That's more important a consideration to conservatives than the question of, should you be penalized for what you did in high school?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think first we would need to establish whether or not whether or not we believe that he did this, guilt. And then the next question would be, is it, if in fact he did it. Now here's the problem where it gets complicated, because Now, if in fact he did it, he's also a liar today.
Well, there's a guy at Slate. I think it's Mark Joseph Sturm. Forgive me if I'm getting his name wrong. I mean, he's made that argument.
Yeah.
You could argue, look, it's 40 years ago. You could say, I think I might have done this. I don't have a recollection of it. Maybe I blacked out. It's possible. I know I was a problem drinker when I was a teenager, but I have come to grips with that. I've made changes.
I would love to see. I mean, I would love to just out of curiosity. I would love to go back in time and see how it plays out if he does that. If he were to play that line out. The other thing that I thought was interesting, just to game this out, and let's just begin with the caveat. Super serious topic, but it's a political topic. We're political analysts. And also, we are taping this on Thursday morning at 9:40 a.m. Eastern Time. It's impossible to predict the next shoe that may drop. And if another shoe does drop on Kavanaugh, then I think he's toast. As of right now, as we're taping it, I think he's doing much better. It feels like he has rebounded. Well,
there's this question about whether she testifies or not. But before we get quite there,
before we get into that,
I do want to get that. But
I just wanted to put it in context. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But so the Slate argument was the fact that he is lying about it, or the potential that he's lying about it is the critical element here, because you could have made mistakes. You could even committed crimes. And made amends for those crimes. Be a changed person, and maybe he should have reached out to people he has wronged and made amends before getting a Supreme Court nomination. But he could have said, "I don't remember this happening. I feel terrible if it's even a remote possibility. And if this is what she believes happens, I apologize profusely. But I ask you to look at my record as an adult. Look at how I treat my staff, how I've treated personal relationships. There are no allegations of me doing this as an adult, so I hope you can see that I'm not the person I was when I was 17 years old." Now, the Trump philosophy, I believe it's in the Woodward book, is the way you deal with these things is deny, deny, deny.
Yeah. Well, that's the Roy Cohn philosophy probably, and I think actually if you look at men who have survived these kind of accusations, Ryan Lizza is an example. Bill Clinton, and I'm not saying that, with Ryan Lizza, I have no idea. He was accused of some sort of Me Too thing at the New Yorker, and he was able to survive. But he, from day one, adamantly pushed back, fought it, denied, lawyered up, and he's still in the game.
Well, he lost his job at the New Yorker, but he's still on CNN.
And I think, is he at GQ or
maybe got hired by somebody else? And I don't know.
Bill Clinton, same thing. Bill Clinton was guilty, but
of what?
Of having relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
I mean, we have to be clear about what we're talking about. Bill Clinton.
Well, he could be guilty of many things, but the one thing we know he was guilty of is the Monica Lewinsky thing. And my point, though, is Bill Clinton, remember, he said, "I want you people to listen to me." Mm-hmm. And he got mad. Mm-hmm. Go back. I'm listening to that. Slate has this great podcast, Slow Burn. Yeah. And the latest episode plays that clip of him just like, "I'm going to say this one more time."
By the way, I was listening to it already.
Yeah.
I hadn't caught up, and you said, are we going to reassess Linda Tripp now because she agreed to this long form interview with Slow Burn, which is a great interview. And I listened to it, and there is zero reason to reassess Linda Tripp. She's just as awful as she always was. She has no justification for what she did.
Do we want to? I could talk about this if you want to. It's a.
Well, let's get to it. Let's finish Kavanaugh before we get into that.
Okay. Let me just recommend the Slow Burn podcast, and I think the point I'm making here right now is it seems like whether you're innocent or not, the odds of survival are better if you immediately concede nothing and take a forceful. Those allegations are false.
Right.
that, for better or worse, right or wrong, it seems like fighting 100% is, from a PR standpoint.
Well, the Clinton case is not a good example of that because he had to fess up. He didn't get to.
But he survived.
He survived because he started, but he had to shift gears, admit that he did lie, and then say it shouldn't matter. Presidents have private lives too.
Yeah,
and move to different ground.
Access Hollywood is a different sort of example. It was on tape, so he couldn't at the time. He later has kind of suggested that it was like that it was fake news.
Doctor tape, right?
But he couldn't pretend it didn't happen. But he never really apologized for. He never was contrite. He was always on offense, and you know, kind of what it takes to be a good person versus what it takes to be a good politician. But like Trump would have, if Trump had shown any sign of contrition or weakness, he might not have survived. But he basically plowed ahead, did not concede anything. And I guess my point is that it may not be great for society, but it does seem like the smart political move as of this minute is to do what Kavanaugh has done.
I mean, and the 180-degree example is Al Franken, who gave kind of a vague apology off the top without admitting to specifics. I think on the premise that I don't want to be the guy that's going to be interrogating and question the credibility of women on the open stage. I don't want to set that precedent that that's an okay thing to do, or extend the precedent that's long existed in society that that's an okay thing to do. And I'll do that with the sense that there will be an investigation. I'll have an opportunity to talk about the specifics at a later time. And then once Kirsten Gillibrand said he should go now, and almost everyone else in the Senate on the Democratic side piled on, he found himself in what he thought was an untenable position. But he clearly said in his farewell address that he deserved an investigation and that all the allegations weren't true. Right. But since he'd already given an inkling that maybe they were, he wasn't in a good place to
give him an inch and he'll take a foot, right, kind of thing, you know. And again, I think sometimes like what makes for a decent person and what makes for a political survival in the 21st century may be two different things. So anyway, back to the what do conservatives think? So like, first, did this happen or not? Which is very unclear for a variety of reasons. Second is, if it did happen, if it did happen, he has lied about it. But let's put that aside and examine the question: should we be held accountable for something we did 36 years ago in high school? I can tell you, well, I have two things to say about this. One is I've been really using Twitter to kind of as like to monitor, to get a focus group of what people are saying. And I've noticed a couple of things. One is a lot of kind of conservative leaning women that I really respect were much more hesitant to defend Kavanaugh than the men were. And these are women who are like conservative, sort of the Rubio Sass sort of, you know, and women that I have a lot of respect for on Twitter who are, I don't know, the tide may have turned now with recent developments, but initially it seemed like they believed the charges, or at least much less skeptical of them than men. So I found that interesting. The other thing I've noticed is that this has been brought up on Twitter. People have said, hey, let's suppose it's true, like everyone does really stupid, crazy stuff, and he's a different person now. And I think it might have been Dennis Prager might have written a column sort of making this argument. I don't want to misattribute it, but there have been people on Twitter certainly making the argument. And I've seen some pushback. Some people have cited famous cases of African-American teens who did something stupid in high school and they're paying a lifelong price for that mistake. And nobody says, well, but the frontal cortex hadn't fully developed. He was only 17 when this happened, right?
And this isn't about putting someone in jail. This is about not having a Supreme Court appointment for the rest of your life.
Yeah, this is not your birthright. You were not entitled, as Robert C. Byrd, I think, correctly said during the Clarence Thomas, like, this is like, you're not entitled to the Supreme Court, a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. The other point someone made, I forget who, but I saw someone make on Twitter, was if you found out that your kid's school bus driver, back in high school did this, held a girl down at a party, and, would you be comfortable with the school bus driver driving your kids to school? And if the answer is no, then should you be comfortable with that person being, like, having a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court? So, like, as much as I'm in favor of forgiveness, and as much as I am a much less than perfect person who I'm sure did a lot of really stupid stuff in high school, it's really hard to say, like, oh, let's just forget about it when people bring up these compelling counter arguments.
Now, so I hear you saying that amongst conservatives, there is a degree of openness to saying Kavanaugh should not get this.
I can tell you that I was surprised to see conservative women that I follow on Twitter initially, I would say probably believing the charges. I don't know if that's changed because I feel like the narrative has shifted in the last 24 hours.
I was going to say, I don't think you're not getting a lot of vibe from Republicans in the Senate that they should pull the plug on Kavanaugh. You have a lot of sentiment being openly stated that they should be confirmed, or that at least they should move to a vote very quickly, and that Dr. Ford is wrong if she doesn't show up.
Right,
Monday.
and I think that's really important. And I hate, again, this is the danger of taping something that could, by the time this is posted, the world could change. But I really feel like the narrative, I went from like Thursday thinking Kavanaugh had 100% chance of confirmation to, maybe Sunday thinking he had like a 40% chance of confirmation, to now thinking he's back up in the 60s, 65% chance.
I'd put it higher than that myself.
And to me, a big turning point was when Dr. Ford, right?
Yeah.
When Dr. Ford suggested, or her attorney suggested, that she would not appear on Monday and that an FBI investigation should be launched. To me, that really made it appear much more political, and like the goal was to delay till after the midterms as opposed to her getting to have her voice heard. And
I do think, I think she is absolutely correct in being extraordinarily apprehensive about walking into the setup that she's being asked to walk into, where it's just going to be a literal he said, she said, who can find out the truth here? Nobody knows. Let's move on. That's not a good process.
My gut is, and you may be right. I mean, Republicans have the majority. They have the gavel. Kavanaugh is already prepping for this, right? So there is it is a formidable challenge, but she is clearly a highly educated person, and my gut is that, all things being equal, if Kavanaugh shows up and does a good job of defending himself, and she shows up and does a good job of talking about what happened to her, she wins.
Well, winning.
She wins.
Winning is getting Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Jeff Flake, maybe Bob Corker.
How many do you need? You need two, right?
You need two, and you need one to get the ball rolling. And if what was someone's
if she shows up and tells a credible story that is bound to be emotional, what kind of pressure does that put on Murkowski and
the biggest pressure is going to be on Collins. But before I get to that, I just want to say I do think that, and I think it's highly understandable because Dr. Ford and her lawyer, they're being thrown into they're being thrown to the wolves, and they're not political professionals, and it's hard to game all these things out. It's easier to say this in hindsight, just a chump like me, talking into a microphone. It was definitely not ideal to say she wants to testify one day and the next day say, well, not under these circumstances. You need to have laid out that criteria right away. And if she had done
really
that right
feel like,
away,
again, this is such a serious topic, and this is like rank punditry what I'm about to say, but I feel like the narrative shifted. I mean, my sense was that Kavanaugh on Monday, today's Thursday, right?
Yeah.
My sense was that Monday and Tuesday he was teetering, and Wednesday the wind shifted, and now again, who knows what tomorrow will hold, and if there, I mean, this isn't fair either. This happened to the Saturday Al Franken, I think that there were other allegations that came out.
Right.
Like, I think it's fair to say that, or I think it's accurate to say that if anyone else comes out with a charge,
and certainly if it happened as an adult,
yeah,
I mean that would be fatal.
And it probably doesn't matter how credible that charge is. Probably, if there's a semi-credible, someone says something happened, then we go Amy Coney Barrett.
Well,
right?
so let's talk about Collins, and we talk about the broader political implications here. So one, I think the pressure on Collins is the most acute of any of the possible wayward Republicans. Flake and Corker are free rangers because they're not big fans of Trump. They're leaving office, so they can just vote their conscience and that's it. Murkowski is semi-untethered to the base because she has proven she can win without the base. When Joe Miller went after her back in, I think it was 2010 or 2012, and she won
a write-in campaign.
She won a write-in campaign as an independent, so she doesn't have to worry about losing her right flank because she knows she can win without it. But it's still a very conservative state. Susan Collins is a senator from maybe not as deep blue a state as it was, but still a light blue state, even though it's Paul LePage's Maine. He never won with 50%. So she has a very active conservative flank to worry about as far as the Republican primary is concerned, but she could pull a Murkowski if she had to, so long as she retained the support of pro-choice Democrats, which she has used, which have been part of her base for a very long time. Her brand is, I am a pro-choice moderate Republican. And she has already defended not just Kavanaugh, but Gorsuch and Roberts as people, oh, don't worry, they're not going to overturn Roe. They respect precedent. It's all going to be fine. So I've already argued she stuck her neck out in that regard because if they don't follow through, it's on her, and she is up for re-election in 2020. Now you add on an attempted rape charge on top of it. If Kavanaugh voted to weaken or eradicate Roe v. Wade, and it's because Susan Collins chose to ignore attempted rape allegations to put him on, I don't see how she survives 2020. Now, she may have a different calculation than me. Maybe she thinks she's not going to run again. She doesn't care. Maybe she just really wants to have another conservative judge on the court, and she doesn't care about the rest. But as so far as she has to care about winning re-election again, I think she's in a very, very precarious situation. But having said that, she was ambushed by CNN coming out of the airport over the weekend, and her body language was, she didn't make any commitments, but she said, well, I talked to him about this on Friday, and he denied it. And she didn't say anything sort of equivalently skeptical, supportive of Dr. Ford. So I don't get a strong sense that she's preparing to break ranks here. But if anyone was going to go first, I think it would be her.
I agree, and I'm surprised by how, I think we talked last week about how I was surprised even back then by her, and I'm still surprised by how solid she's being on this, that she's not equivocating. Where did she get this steel spine from? When did she become...
I think it's the opposite of spine. I think
from a Republican standpoint, I mean, what is it, the whole "don't get wobbly on me, George" line that Margaret Thatcher had? I mean, I'm really surprised that she... look, she's getting pressure from both sides. Obviously, there's a partisan pressure on her to toe the line and vote for a Republican nominee. But there's got to be a lot of pressure from the left and from her pro-choice base. You just said that was her.
She's walked the line between maintaining her Republican bona fides and
when
being a pro-choice moderate.
And when I say steel spine, I mean she's under immense pressure from both directions, and her body language does not betray any sort of equivocation. I mean, she
has a poker face. I will give her that. But I think she largely has survived walking this line by minimizing controversies, avoiding the fray, staying under the radar. She breaks ranks very, very rarely, very, very carefully. By and large, she is a partisan Republican. So I don't think she likes the idea of being seen as all that renegade.
Right. Well, let's keep in mind the other thing, too, is the impact that this could have on midterms, which I think is really an interesting question because of, suburban women, like the people that I'm following on Twitter and watching on Twitter. I call them my base, actually. And they, Republicans could get Kavanaugh, but if suburban, women perceive that this was, that he is in fact guilty and that this was a sham, then, who knows where that leads politically.
Well, my sense is, I'll say two things. One, I think the operating mentality of the Trump Republican Party is, we don't need to hold on to upscale suburban moderate women. We need to double down on the Trump base and calling things like this locker room behavior or fake news. And we rally our base that way, and that's going to help us mitigate losses. So to the extent they're thinking about the midterms, I imagine they're going in that direction. Number two, what I really think is happening behind closed doors in Republican circles is an assumption that they are going to lose, or it's very likely they're going to lose, not just the House, but maybe even the Senate. It was just Tuesday they had polls showing Phil Bredesen up 5 points in Tennessee and Kristen Sinema up 7 points in Arizona. Now, there's other things you could look at. Kramer's up in North Dakota by a few. Jackie Rosen's in a dead heat race in Nevada. You can't assume that's a lock for Democrats. The Beto O'Rourke polls in Texas are a bit all over the map. But there is a real possibility that Republicans lose the Senate. And you have to be thinking that this Supreme Court seat is the last thing the Republicans get to do in the Trump presidency. There is certainly no guarantee they can get more judges. There's no guarantee to get more legislation. So you better well go all out to make sure you save this seat. And if you pull the plug on him now, you don't necessarily have enough time to get a second seat in there. And if there was a vetting problem with whoever you put in as a rush job, that's it. You're done.
That's the point I was going to bring up, is that if you believe the Senate's gone, is that because there's what's the lesson? Fail quick. It's like a tech Silicon Valley thing or something, like you want to fail quick, right? So pull your starting pitcher before the game is lost, right? Is there is there a deadline whereby you could get Barrett confirmed in a lame duck Senate? And, maybe that time has passed. Maybe
if you had a golden nominee with no smoking guns, but I mean, as we've learned, vetting is important when it comes to judges.
Everyone has something, and with Barrett, it's this. The one thing we know is her involvement in this evangelical Catholic group.
That's what you know.
That's what we know.
You don't know what you don't know.
Well, I think that there are known knowns and unknown unknowns. And as Don Rumsfeld would say, I'm worried about the unknown unknowns here, right? Not the known knowns. No, you're totally right. You never know, even with someone. Look, Brett Kavanaugh could have been a Boy Scout for 36 years. For 36 years. And he could still be completely undone by something that allegedly happened 36 years ago, I think.
I need to go soon, but I do want to talk about Linda Tripp.
Okay.
So if you're listening to Slow Burn, which is the Slate podcast, it's in its second season. The first season was Watergate. This season is the Clinton impeachment. I'll say I think season 1 is better.
I think season 2 is better.
To some extent, season 2 to me feels like, the Clinton impeachment for millennials. For those who weren't there, who need to get caught up what really happened.
When do you get to season 3?
Obviously, if I was around for Watergate, maybe I would feel that way about Watergate too. But I felt like there were things about Watergate that I wasn't aware of. People who I got talked to, who I hadn't heard their perspectives.
Do you remember that woman? It was Martha.
Yeah, like that whole story I had no idea about. This was this woman who was like quasi imprisoned, right?
She was kidnapped by the Nixon henchmen. She was like the wife of his attorney general.
The attorney general.
And she knew stuff, and so they basically kept her drugged up in a hotel room, so she couldn't. And she was like friends with reporters, so she would call them anyway. There
hasn't been a thing like that in season 2 that I was not aware of that has been shown to me. But it is interesting to hear from some of the players who are not household names, as well as one who is a household name like Linda Tripp.
Well, also they have like Ann Coulter's been on.
Yeah.
Who else? Several people that were like very involved. Because I guess Ann Coulter was one of what were they called? One of the attorneys that were like feeding information to Ken Starr. I guess they had a name. Elves, Munchkins. I'm not sure.
Right.
Anyway, Linda Tripp. No, in my opinion, the best episode by far was the Linda Tripp episode, and that's the as we speak the penultimate episode, I guess the next to, not the most recent episode, but the next to most recent episode that has dropped. And I raised the question: we have reassessed Bill Clinton in recent years in light of the Me Too moment, and I think Monica Lewinsky's gotten kind of a second look. And I was wondering, does Linda Tripp deserve one? And I will tell you, Bill, why I asked that question. Because when you listen to this interview, and I thought that the host of Slow Burn was very fair to her and letting her present her argument, her rationale for why she did this. Why would you tape a friend of yours? The first interesting thing, I said so many parallels to Trump. Linda Tripp was part of the deep state. She was a George H.W. Bush holdover who didn't like the Clintons, but who was part of the bureaucracy. It's very, basically it's what Donald Trump talks about with the deep state. But the thing that Tripp says is that she felt like Monica Lewinsky had the mentality. This is my version of it. That Monica Lewinsky had the mentality of a child. That she came across as a young girl who was being victimized by a much older man who was in a position of authority. And it was almost like an in loco parentis thing, that Linda Tripp felt like this was not an adult woman, that this was a child, someone with the mentality of a child who was being abused and used by an older man, a much older man in a much, much, much higher position, and that she felt it was incumbent upon her to do something to stop this. That is now again, this is like the most generous framing.
Right. And it's not even all that generous. It's not exculpatory at all.
Well, anyway, but stick with me for a minute here. As we reevaluate Bill Clinton, and as we reevaluate Monica Lewinsky, could we not see Linda Tripp in a better light? I'm not saying she's a feminist hero, but you could argue that what she was trying to do was a feminist thing. She was trying to protect a woman, a young woman, from an older man.
But one of the things I do think is helpful in listening to the podcast is within the context of the relationship, Monica Lewinsky was not being abused. She was not a victim of that relationship. I think she was a victim after the relationship, the way she was treated in the media by some Clinton loyalists, the way she was denigrated after the fact. But it was a consensual relationship.
Okay, but two quick things. One, did you catch the part where Linda Tripp says she believed that if they didn't go to the FBI, that she and Monica would have both been murdered? Did you catch that part?
Well, that's the other part of this. Part of her motivation is that despite being in the deep state, she was buying into the nuttiest of the Clinton conspiracy theories. She was talking about Vince Foster being murdered.
And herself.
Right.
She says on that interview, I can't believe this hasn't been bigger news, or maybe this is old news. Maybe this has already been aired and I missed it. But Linda Tripp says on that podcast, I feared that if Monica and I did not go to the FBI, that we would both, essentially, she said, we would both be murdered by the Clintons.
Right, which is nuts. Okay. It doesn't defend her in any way. It shows how completely unlike she was.
I'm making the point. This is aside from my argument. I'm making that point because I think it was really notable that she said that. This doesn't help my cause, right. But I'm bringing.
So the fact that she was a Clinton conspiracy.
The part that does help my cause is, Bill, you are right that it was consensual in the sense that Monica was all for it. And in fact, if you listen to this podcast, like not just the one episode, but in its totality, it's very clear that Monica was like actually obsessed with Bill Clinton, like in love with him. She wanted to she saw him as a rock star and wanted to spend the rest of her life with him. I mean, in that sense, my point is, in Tripp's mind, Monica was a child who did not have the right to give consent. It could not be consensual in Linda Tripp's mind because Monica Lewinsky was a child who could not grant consent.
It's fine to believe that, and I think clearly there was a lot of naivete. She was an adult, but a young adult. And the worshipful nature of the relationship was probably not a healthy thing for someone to get into. If I was a friend of hers, I might counsel her to not get in that relationship, but to take the fact that you believe that she was not able to give consent to the relationship, and be a Clinton conspiracy nut. Therefore, I'm going to lie to my supposed friend, tape her without her consent, and feed that information to the FBI to save her is just, it is the absolute worst way. I mean, it shows complete disregard for the other person's feelings. You're claiming you're trying to protect your feelings with putting no consideration into what you're putting someone else through.
Well, let's go to the conspiracy part. I think it is entirely plausible that Tripp believed that the Clintons would try to kill Monica Lewinsky. Tripp believed that. Now, that may be crazy, that may be conspiratorial, but I think it's possible that Tripp believed that that was true. Therefore, Tripp, in her mind, is helping her friend.
Well, then you say to your friend, I think what might happen to you, and here's what I think you should do.
She did that. Well, that was her argument for saving the blue dress.
Well, but if she gave other advice that she didn't take, you don't then say, I'm going to make decisions for you that are going to put you through a lifetime of misery.
Okay, now let's talk about the way that Linda. This hasn't shown up on the documentary yet, or in the Slow Burn podcast yet. Okay, but let's talk about the way Linda Tripp was portrayed by the media, including. Wasn't it John Goodman?
Yes.
Who portrayed her on Saturday Night Live?
Yes.
Can we imagine if a liberal woman who is defending, at least in her mind, who is trying to protect a young woman from a male predator, would be portrayed as an fat, ugly man?
The body shaming aside, so I'm not going to endorse body shaming. But remember, at the point of that sketch, and I think even at the point of today, it's not a predator-prey relationship. Like I think you can make a totally legitimate case that it constitutes workplace harassment because there's an inherent power imbalance. Even though it's consensual, it affects the entire workplace. It creates problems for other employees of the office, and so I am not endorsing the relationship in any way. But the relationship itself was not predatory. So therefore, the notion that Tripp is the villain in that aspect of the story still holds up.
See, I think it's interesting. I will tell you, as I listened to it, I found Tripp more. I was more sympathetic toward Tripp than I had been previously when I listened to this episode. I'm not saying she's a hero, but I do think that she has been cast as a villain, and that is probably indelible. And I'm not sure it's completely fair how much she wears the black hat.
But I encourage you to listen to the episode.
That's my takeaway.
I give Tripp credit for doing the interview.
Yeah.
And being very candid. But I imagine most people be like me, where like your anger at Tripp will be welled up anew when you hear her actually explain herself.
I threw that out on Twitter just as a question. Is it time to give Linda Tripp a second look? Like, does she deserve all these years later? We've changed how we think about Bill Clinton. We've changed how we think about Monica. Should we change how we think about Linda Tripp? Maybe. And I can't find a single person who thinks we should. I mean, not a single person defended Linda Tripp. I'll put it to you that way. For what that's worth.
Let's leave it on that note. What do you got to plug, Matt Lewis?
Oh man, the podcast is doing awesome, dude. I interviewed Chris Steyerwalt last week about his book "Every Man a King," about populism. I'm talking to Francis Fukuyama about his book on identity. I did a book with this dude who wrote a book. It hasn't gone up yet, but it's a podcast. It's a short history of drunkenness. And I'm supposed to talk to Congresswoman Mia Love as well on the podcast. So things are plugging away, man. Check it out. Matt Lewis and the News on iTunes.
Well, I did an event here in Western Massachusetts, in Springfield, for the World Affairs Council of Western Massachusetts. Hardcore DMZ listeners might remember I gave a foreign policy address there 2 years ago, which you can get on YouTube. I interviewed someone who is now a Pentagon contractor for cybersecurity. He was with the Center for New American Security. He has a vision what he calls heartland security as a way to reconnect the American heartland with the global economy. And so I did a long form interview with him from an audience That video should be on YouTube soon. I don't think it's quite up yet. But we also did an interview with the local PBS station for their show Connecting Point and talked about it in shorter form. And that show's already aired and is available on the WGBY YouTube channel and on their website. So check that out.
Cool. I should probably plug two other quick things. One is I'm taking the podcast on the road this coming week. Next week I'll be in Austin, Texas, at the Texas Tribune Fest, interviewing Bill Kristol for Matt Lewis in the News podcast. And then the next day I'll be Kristol and I, along with some others, Amanda Carpenter, and some others will be on a podcast about on a panel discussion about conservatism. Also, I had a piece at the Daily Beast this week about how NPR would not use the term abortion doctor to describe the abortion doctor Kermit Gosnell. And that has gotten a little bit of a splash on the conservative blogosphere.
There's still blogosphere. Who knew?
Well, the interwebs, the Twitter sphere, all that. Yeah.
All right. Till next week, sir.
All right. See you guys.
Bye-bye.
See you, Bill.